and welcome to this year's Pediatric Nursing Update Conference. And we are so glad to be able to bring this to you virtually, and that many of you are joining from home all over Washington as well as Oregon and some parts of Idaho. My name is Hyen. I'm the nurse manager for Outreach Education, and our team provides continuing nursing education and training to health professionals in the WAMI region. Our programs include conferences such as this one and the Duncan Seminar, that focuses on pediatric neurodevelopmental health, nursing grand rounds, and the Nursing Research Symposium. Some of those events are happening pretty soon, sometime in the spring. We also do the life support training such as PALS, PAIRS, and NRP. Many of our events are recorded, including this one. So if you have colleagues who missed out on the conference, let them know that the videos will be available after for participation credit and not continuing education or clock hours credits. We included some links for more information about our upcoming events, as well as how to access our online video library. So check those out. And since we're all connecting in virtually, this is just a map of where you all are coming from. So all over Washington, Portland, and borderline Idaho. So welcome everyone. This is our planning committee. I want to thank our planning committee for putting together this content. Without them, we can't do this work. And if you are interested in becoming a part of our planning committee, please reach out to outreacheducation@seattlechildrens.org, and we can let you know more information about our planning committee and how to be involved. And a big thank you to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction for providing free clock hours to our school nurses for today. I will go over directions for how to obtain clock hours in a few minutes here, as well as I also want to give a shout out to Joe, who is from our Seattle Children's audiovisual team for helping us stay connected today. The sign-in sheet is going to be done by collecting information that you use to log into the meeting. So I noticed that some of you only used your first name in the as your login. We did send out directions to log in with the name that you registered with, as well as your email address. If you logged in with your first name, just know that it will be a little bit delayed for us to verify your attendance because we have to do some matching from the WebEx report and your registration. So once we verify everyone's attendance through our WebEx report, we will send the course evaluations to you so that you can obtain your continuing education credits, and then we will submit that same roster to the Office of Public Instruction so that they will verify that list with the list through PD Enroller. And if you are a school nurse or you work for the school and you want to have clock hours, a reminder that you will need to have registered for this event in PD Enroller so that they have a list of your name so that they can verify with our attendance before they send you the information to obtain clock hours. For RC certificates, they will be emailed directly to you once you complete the course evaluation. And clock hours are not managed by us, they are managed by OSPI. If you have questions related to clock hours, please contact them. It might just be that we missed your name for whatever reason through our WebEx reporting, or that we had a hard time verifying your attendance because of the inability to name match with your login information. Just a reminder of our course agenda for today. We will be taking a break at 10 o'clock and a break at 2 p.m. and then going into our breakout sessions for pediatric migraines and the pediatric inflammatory bowel disease talk. And I'll give more directions on that in the afternoon. Since there are a lot of us in this room, it's going to be hard for us to manage questions. We're going to save the questions related to connection issues or AV issues for the chat. So if you have issues, hearing us or not being able to connect to audio, message us in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers, please use Mentimeter. I'm going to leave this on for a few seconds so that you can scan the QR code just so you have that available to you, or you can go to mentimeter.com and enter that code below on your computer so that we could use that as a platform to moderate questions for today. And I will put the link in the chat for you so that you have access to it as well. For our first speaker, we have Joy Briggs. She is currently the practice manager for the Diabetes and Endocrine Clinic at Seattle Children's. She's been in this role for the last 5 years and has been a nurse leader for the last 11 years. She came to Seattle Children's after her son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and this job has allowed her the opportunity to focus on her passion for nursing leadership and her personal experience with raising a child with diabetes. And prior to Children's, Joy worked as a nurse manager at UW Northwest, where she managed the surgical specialty unit, the day surgery unit, and the medical oncology unit. And after 20 years of nursing, Joy remains passionate about leadership and nursing. So I'm going to hand this over to Joy.
Well, first of all, thank you to everybody who's on this conference, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak here today. As Stan mentioned, I'm very passionate about this topic and have a lot to say as diabetes has grown exponentially in the last 5 years in particular. As mentioned, I currently am the practice manager and am the prior nurse manager for the Diabetes and Endocrinology Clinic. I have nothing to disclose for this speech today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. So during my time with you guys today, I'm going to be talking about several topics. First, I'm going to talk about the role of continuous glucose monitors in diabetes therapy. I'm going to talk about how closed hybrid loops work, what are closed hybrid loop technology, and why this is important. I'm going to talk about a little bit about insulin pumps and smart pens. I'm going to talk about some of the apps that are available on the market for people with diabetes. And I'm going to discuss how all of this is important in how we care for patients with diabetes. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. I thought I would start with a brief reminder for those of you who may not take care of diabetes patients on a regular basis. Some of the general terminology that is used in the world of diabetes management. I will be pausing several times through this speech to allow for questions, so please feel free to ask me questions, and we'll go from there. So this slide, again, is just a basic review of diabetes management and the terminology that we use. So first and foremost, this speech does focus more on type 1 diabetes than type 2 diabetes, but the concepts are pretty similar for both of these. First, I'm going to remind everybody what a carb ratio is. A carb ratio is the amount of insulin that is needed to cover certain grams of carbohydrates, or grams of carbohydrates that is consumed. So diabetics will calculate how many carbs they're going to eat and will give insulin to cover that. And the calculation is their carb ratio. Then correction factor or insulin sensitivity. Those two terms are used interchangeably, and that is the amount 1 unit of insulin will reduce blood sugar. So, for example, if a correction factor is 20, then 1 unit of insulin will reduce blood sugar 20 points. So that's really important as we calculate how much blood sugar is needed or how much insulin is needed to correct or cover carbs. MDI is the acronym we use to talk about multiple daily injections. This differentiates those patients who use injections versus those from pump therapy. So I may refer to MDI. And then the next thing is the calculation that we use to calculate insulin dose. This is written out, so it may not make a lot of sense. But essentially, to calculate how much insulin is needed, you're going to take the amount of carbs eaten, divide that by the carb ratio, and add that number to another problem, which is the blood sugar, current blood sugar minus the target blood sugar, divided by the correction factor. So with that, I'm going to just give a quick example. So for example, if somebody is going to eat 45 grams of carb and their carb ratio is 5, that would be 9 units of insulin. And say their blood sugar is 300, their target is 100, that's a total of 200 divided by their correction factor of 20, which is conveniently 10. So 10 units plus 9 units is a total of 19 units. So that particular person would give 19 units at that time before they ate their meal. The other important thing to remember, particularly in pediatrics, is that whenever you are calculating insulin to be administered, you're always going to round down to the nearest unit. Even if that calculation comes out to be something like 12.8 units, you're still going to round down to 12.5 units. And the reason why we do this is because We would rather see a child's blood sugar run a little bit higher than run the risk of being low and then needing to treat that low blood sugar. So these are just some basic foundations that we use in daily practice with kids with diabetes. I wanted to take a few minutes to go over that as we get ready to dive into the meat of my speech today. This is just something that's going to be in the background. And when we get to questions in a little bit, please feel free to ask me. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is the role of continuous glucose monitors in diabetes therapy. This technology is really the foundation for everything that we do currently. So continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, and that's how I'm going to refer to it for the rest of the speech because continuous glucose monitor is a mouthful, is essentially a device that measures the interstitial fluid to determine current blood glucose levels and identify a trend. What's important to know about this is that because continuous glucose monitors measure interstitial fluid and not blood glucose data is often 15 to 20 points different than the serum blood sugar. So this is normal and expected. So if you are checking blood glucose levels in the hospital or at school or wherever else you may be seeing patients, and you are checking that against somebody's continuous glucose monitor, you will notice that there is a difference in those numbers. That is okay and important to know. So we like to describe this as a roller coaster. So if a blood sugar is going up, the serum blood sugar will actually be higher than the blood glucose reading. So, so that's important to know. And likewise, when the blood sugar is going down, the blood glucose on a glucometer is going to actually be a little bit lower than the interstitial fluid reading. Now, the other thing about CGMs that's really important to know is that they're actually considered more accurate of a reading than that of a glucometer. And the reason for that is because the manufacturers of those CGMs actually test them against each other, and they're much more reliable of a method. If you were to take 6 different glucometers, you would get 6 different readings. If you take your CGM, you're going to get a more consistent reading over time. So why do we care about CGM use? Well, first of all, CGMs are able to identify trends, which, as I mentioned, also for those that are on the call, my family is in the background. I'm actually doing this speech from Hawaii, so if you hear any extra noise, that is them. So anyway, CGM technology is important because first and foremost, it identifies trends. This is critically important when we're doing making decisions regarding treatment. So with the CGM reading, you are going to see a number followed by an arrow. That arrow can be going up, it could be going sideways, or it could be going down. It could even be rapidly going up and down, and that's usually indicated by a double arrow. And so this is really important as you're making decisions for management. So for example, a blood sugar of 100 with a double arrow going up is going to require different treatment than a blood sugar of 100 with a double arrow going down. And so with that 100 of the double arrow going down, you might consider giving your patient, or if you are diabetic yourself, you might consider giving yourself some carbs to help prevent that hypoglycemia. Likewise, if you have that 100 with a double arrow going up, you may actually consider giving yourself a little bit of a correction in order to avoid hyperglycemia. And so that's just in theory what you might do with those trends. So the next thing that's really important about CGM technology, particularly with the pediatric population, is that the bigger devices that are on the market have the ability to share data. And what that means is that as a parent, I can see what's happening with my child's blood sugar at any time. Now, this is not 100% universal. There's some technology issues that may interfere with that ability. But for most of our patients, that ability to be able to see what's happening with your kid is super critical because, as we know, kids can't be with us 100% of the time. For the patient who is wearing the CGM, one of the biggest advantages is the fact that the CGMs have been FDA approved to dose off of, which means they do not need to do a finger poke. Prior to CGMs becoming so popular on the market, kids were having to check their blood sugars up to 10 times or more a day, which is really rough on your fingers if you think about it. And so now with the CGMs that are on the market, most of them do not require a finger poke at all. And if they do, it only requires a finger poke at calibration or once a day, as opposed to multiple times a day. Additionally, CGMs can be worn for multiple days at a time, anywhere from 7 to 15 days before you need to change that. So it allows families to not have to be as burdened with the daily management of diabetes. And finally, before I move on from this slide, CGMs will allow for treatment decisions to be made at the clinic level based on time and range. And I'm going to talk about time and range here in a second. So as I mentioned, time and range is a really important concept, and more clinicians are using this as a way to talk about diabetes management and to talk about how to take care of kiddos on a day-to-day basis. So what is time and range? So time and range is defined as the percentage of time that a person spends with their blood glucose level in a target range. Seems pretty self-explanatory, but as you can see from the graphs I have here on the slide, that it does mean something. So with our diabetics and most of our diabetics in clinic, our goals are to have our patients within 70% time in range, and we define that as in a range between 70 and 180 milligrams per deciliter, with less than 4% of their blood sugars in the low range, and that they're minimizing the time above 180. So I'm going to direct your attention to this graph up here. This graph is talking about the many phases of what A1C of 7% looks like. So 7% is considered healthy and is our goal for our diabetic patients to reach. And as you can see in this first slide, this patient's A1C may be 7, but they have a lot of variability and a lot of highs and lows, where 40% of their time is in range, 40% of their time is above range, and 20% of the time is low. So this kid may have an A1C of 7%, but probably feels gross most of the time because they are vacillating between high and low on a very, very frequent basis. This is an A1C of 7% and is more common for our families. And in this one, they're 70% time in range. They still have 25% of their time above their target of 180, but much lower percentage of time in that low range. And then here's our perfect person who has 100% time in range, and you can see this nice flat wave line here where all of their blood sugars are within that 70 to 180. So you can see why this makes a difference. And here's just another representation of that where you can see here's no time in range, all the way up to 100% time in range. So how we would treat this child is going to be very differently. So for this kid that's 25% in range, we might talk about needing to bolus for carbs more frequently, making sure that they're giving themselves corrections on a regular basis, etc. Whereas this kiddo is 100% time in range, we're going to tell them they're doing a great job and they don't need to make any changes to their behavior. And if you ever see a kid 100% time in range, please let me know. So, sorry. There we go. So now that we know what a CGM is and why we think it's so cool and what's so important about it, what do we need to know about starting them? So with this great technology, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could start every kid on a CGM at the time they were diagnosed? And that is ultimately where we are getting ready to go. We are not there yet, but I'm hopeful that within the next year or two that is going to happen. So currently, kiddos start on a CGM ideally 2 to 3 weeks after diagnosis, if at all possible. For those of you who know, our current education is a 2-day process with 1 day happening either inpatient or outpatient. And then our patients come back for a second day about a week later. And it's at that second day of education where we write those prescriptions for CGM. So Industry is working towards this as well because of the much improved data and information we can get off of the continuous glucose monitor. However, as we know, industry doesn't necessarily drive everything. Insurance drives most things. And we still are seeing some insurance companies remaining behind the time, which does affect how soon patients can start therapy. And in those cases, the insurance companies are wanting to see compliance with diabetes management first, meaning regular blood sugar checks of at least 4 times a day, and that they are giving insulin at least that often as well. And so it can be frustrating to have to prove that you are doing this. And so there are some workarounds, including giving patients CGMs as samples, or working with some of the other blood sugar devices and glucometers that are on the market to get there. So before I move on, just a couple of final thoughts on CGM use. There are multiple CGMs that are on the market. The most common that we use in our clinic is the Dexcom G6, soon to be G7. The most current iteration is going to be coming out in March, so we're very excited about that. Libre 2 and Libre 3 are also on the market and are very good options. The Medtronic Guardian is another one that's out there. That one does require calibration and blood sugar checks, so it's not quite as popular. And then the Senseonic, which is currently FDA approved for only 18 and older, is an implanted device, kind of like a Norplant, that is inserted under the arm and is left in place for a year. And that one is pretty cool as well. And then again, just a reminder that patients and families factor in many things when making a decision about what CGM to choose, including how easy it is to use, if it's compatible with insulin pumps, which I'm going to go into a lot more detail about, if it's able to share that data, and how often you would need to do those finger pokes if you do it all. And then finally, the reason why I wanted to spend quite a bit of time on CGM use is because if the only thing a child does is add CGM to their diabetes management, that's it. They continue to use MDI. They're not on an insulin pump. They may or may not do anything else but wear a CGM. If they're wearing a CGM, that alone can improve an A1C by at least 1 percentage point. So it is absolutely critical that patients are on this device. And as technology continues to advance, I am sure that those of you who are inpatient will see more and more patients on CGMs in the hospital. Those of you who are not inpatient, who work at schools, you may also see your type 1 diabetics on a CGM, which should make your life easier as well as the life of the kiddo much easier. So moving on, CGMs, while they are fantastic, are not the only thing that has hit the market in the last 5 years. So also a lot of advances in smart pen technology and insulin pumps. So smart pen technology is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a pen that's smart. So currently, the InPen is the only smart pen that's on the market in the United States. It functions exactly the way an insulin pen does. You dial up your dose, you inject it under the skin, you use a pen needle. Pretty straightforward. The difference is that it uses an app. Oh, geez, I moved on. I didn't want to do that. It uses this app over here on your phone. It is compatible with almost all smartphones. And as you can see here, it tracks your blood sugar and the amount of insulin that you are giving with each of those blood glucoses. So it's a great in-between device for those families who need a stepping stone from using MDI before they get into pump therapy. And it's great for clinicians because we can track trends. It's compatible with the Dexcom or the Medtronic Guardian, so we can see their CGM and how that interacts with their blood sugar dosing. There are rumors that more pens are coming and going to be hitting the market in the near future, but we have not seen those yet. So for now, it is the InPen. And again, this is great for families who struggle with technology in general, or families who aren't quite ready for an insulin pen, insulin pump, and who need a little bit extra help in managing diabetes on a daily basis. So that is just really quick on this insulin pens, and I'm going to go right into closed hybrid loop technology, which is not synonymous with insulin pumps, but definitely requires an insulin pump in order to be effective. So what is closed hybrid loop? And in the daily use, you might hear us refer to it as closed loop, which is technically slightly different, but it's just easier to say. Essentially, what a closed hybrid loop is a system in which an insulin pump talks to a CGM. And this is really important, and technically I would say the CGM is talking to the pump. So what is happening is that communication allows the use of an algorithm to adjust insulin delivery. So that's really important because it can protect against hypoglycemia. It increases insulin delivery to reduce hyperglycemia. And it provides for much better control of blood sugar overall. What it does not do is automatically deliver insulin for food coverage. If it did, it wouldn't be hybrid. It would just be a straight closed loop. So this tracing down here is an example of a report you might see with a patient who's on a closed loop, a hybrid loop system, where you can see down here the amount of insulin that is being delivered and how it corresponds to the blood sugar tracing of this person's management. So this is a little bit of a history of closed hybrid loop technology and how we got to this place. So before any of this happened, what happened before we were able to correct for high blood sugars, we focused on suspending insulin delivery for low. This was called low glucose suspend, and what this was the ability to stop delivery of insulin when the system recognized the low blood sugar was occurring. That was really cool. We were able to then see a break in in hypoglycemic events, which was nice, but then that wasn't good enough. So then we moved on to predictive low glucose suspend, and what this was, or is, because it's still available on the market, is the ability of an insulin pump and sensor to recognize that trend arrow. So if that trend arrow is going down and the system recognizes that, oh my goodness, this person is going to hit a blood sugar of 70 in 10 minutes, I better stop. It will then stop the delivery of insulin, and by doing so, it will avoid that 70 or hypoglycemic event from occurring at all. And these devices can suspend and then resume automatically with no knowledge to the patient, which is very, very nice. So then we go into a hybrid closed loop, which is where we are today, which is where not only are we doing that predictive suspend for low blood sugars, but now we can also say, okay, we recognize that this blood sugar is going really high really fast. Maybe they didn't give carb coverage. So now we're going to ramp up delivery of insulin in order to hopefully prevent a significant high. So, and again, this is all happening in the background without our patient having to do anything except bolus for food. So our next step in this journey, hopefully, is to get to a place where we can be fully automated with closed loop, where the system is now recognizing that the patient is eating and is able to give a correction for that carb coverage and making sure that that blood glucose then is staying steady without any interaction from the patient. And this is very close to that fully automated multi-hormone closed loop, which would make those decisions based on hormonal inputs and recognizing not only insulin delivery, but glucagon, and when glucagon is being released into the body. So for today's purposes, we are here at this hybrid closed loop section of how the system is working. So I kind of alluded to this, but why do we care about closed loop systems, and why are they so special? First and foremost, it allows for tighter blood glucose control, increasing that time in range because the system is working in the background to keep blood sugars in a steady base. And as you can imagine, because this is all happening in the background, this is reducing the burden on the patient. They do not have to think about their diabetes quite 24/7, maybe more like 15/7. So in that case, it's reducing the burden for them. It minimizes hypoglycemic events, which is critically important because many of our patients are really, really worried about being low. And as they should be, being low is scary. One, you don't feel good, you feel dizzy and like you're going to pass out, and then you may actually pass out. And it's no good to be low. And then if you are low, then you get a rebound high because now you've treated yourself with carbs and you've spiked your blood sugars too high. So the system helps eliminate that yo-yo effect by keeping that blood sugar as steady as possible. Over time, this improves patient outcomes such as A1C and time in range by using these systems on a regular basis. And so, again, these systems are really important for keeping people steady and in better control. Now, of course, nothing comes without challenge, and this technology also has some challenges as well. And the biggest of these is that most of the products that are on the market are compatible only with specific systems of CGM. These systems still require patient interaction to bolus with food, so it's not 100% in the background. It does take a lot of time to get approved for the systems and for insulin pumps in general, so you can't just start on it tomorrow if you want to. You probably are going to be waiting up to 2 months before you can start on your insulin pump. You are still wearing something. It is not invisible. It is technology that you are wearing on your body, and that is an issue for some patients. And then on the provider side, one of our biggest challenges is that each device works slightly differently, which increases the burden on our providers because we need to then know each individual system, its quirks and how it works. Each system has a slightly different reporting system, and so we have to be trained and competent in all of these various systems. And for the school nurses that are on this conference, that means that you also need to at least have a bare minimum knowledge of all the different systems that are out there and what is different between each of those systems. So with that, what is on the market? So there are 3 closed hybrid loop systems currently on the market. The granddaddy is the Medtronic 670 and 770G. This was the first hybrid closed loop system on the market, and that came out 5 years ago, actually. So this is really new technology. So Medtronic 670 and 770 work with the Medtronic Guardian sensor, which is important to know because of its proprietary nature. If a patient wants to go on this system, they have to make sure they're on the right sensor. Whereas the Tandem and the Omnipod both use the Dexcom sensor. And so you could conceivably interchange between these 2 systems without issue. So the Tandem was the second closed hybrid loop on the system, or on the market, and the Tandem currently has the best control and the tightest control of blood sugars that's available today. Their algorithm is actually amazing. And then Omnipod 5 is the newest on the market. It just hit the market this last year in May. So it's still relatively new. We are still learning quite a bit about it. But the advantage of the Omnipod over the other 2 systems is that Omnipod is the only system on the market that's tubeless, which does allow for a little bit more freedom of movement for patients. The Omnipod 5's algorithm also learns over time. And so in the beginning, you're not necessarily going to have great control, but as that algorithm is learning this particular person's patterns, it does tighten up, and over time it becomes really well controlled and really does allow for great control. So these are the 3 that are currently on the market in the United States. I do believe that there's 1 or 2 other in Europe, but I'm not there, so I'm not going to talk about those. So what's coming next? So as you can see, the last 5 years have really brought about a huge amount of change and a huge amount of improvement in diabetes management and control for our patients. So what do we expect is going to happen in the next 5 years? Well, CGM technology is going to get smaller. The Dexcom currently is about the size of an inch, about a quarter, and the new iteration that's coming out in March is a smaller size, a little smaller than a quarter. The Libre 2 is also quarter size and is going to be going down to about dime size, so teeny tiny little thing. And that's important because many of our diabetic patients don't want everybody in the world to know that they're diabetic, And if we can hide the technology they're wearing, that's great for them. And I alluded to this again in the beginning, but the better these products get, the more likely we're going to eliminate the need for glucometer checks. I would not be surprised, and this is just me making a wild guess, but I would expect that in 10 years or so, we're not going to be using glucometers anymore because the CGM technology will be so good that there's no point in using a glucometer that provides wildly inaccurate information. And then really, really exciting, and this actually just hit the market as I was preparing the slide deck. There are new advances in biotherapies that will be able to delay the onset of diabetes. The first one was FDA approved about a month ago, so really exciting things that are coming. I also know that the future holds the true closed-loop technology, where those algorithms will be able to identify food boluses and be able to administer insulin without patient input at all, which is huge. So these smart pumps, we're going to get even smarter, and so they're going to be able to recognize that food has been consumed and I need to give insulin to correct that. It's going to be able to really, truly be tighter controlled. There's some current just technical issues with these systems. If your CGM isn't close enough to your pump, you can get some delays in readings. Those things will get smarter and be able to be more communicative. One of the things that has recently hit the market that I realized I didn't talk about is that you will be able to control your insulin pump from your phone. And that's a really big deal because that's one less thing you have to carry around. Most people have a smartphone these days, and if I can give my insulin through my phone, I don't have to take my pump out of my pocket, or I don't even have to address the pump at all. Biotherapies that will cure diabetes or prevent diabetes from happening are going to happen within our lifetime. Now, the cure for diabetes is still an elusive thing, but it's getting closer every day. And then those biotherapies that can prevent the onset of diabetes, that's going to happen probably within the next year or two. And children's is going to be on the forefront of administering these. And then what's really important is that these technologies that I've talked about today are really targeted towards the type 1 population, but these therapies are becoming more and more commonly used to cover patients with type 2 as well. And even though in the pediatric world, we think about type 1 diabetes and our patients with type 1 diabetes is the primary, when I think about type diabetes, I'm almost always thinking type 1. But the vast majority of people with diabetes in the world today are type 2 diabetics. And having this technology available to these people is also significantly huge and will hopefully change our way we are looking at diabetes and diabetes management. So this brings me to T-Shield, which is that biotherapy I was discussing just a second ago. It is the first biotherapy on the market for diabetes management. This medication has been shown to delay the onset of type 1 diabetes in patients who are at known risk for up to or longer, for an average of 2 years, meaning some people delay getting their type 1 for longer than 2 years, and a few a little less than 2 years. So this is really, really groundbreaking because if you think about it, outside of technology, those pumps, the pens, the CGMs, there really hasn't been any advancement in the medical care of diabetes since the advent of insulin 100 years ago. So again, the basic therapy of, in order to treat somebody with diabetes, you give them insulin. That hasn't changed in 100 years. Now, sure, the types of insulins that are available have changed, but other options for treatment have not been available outside of technology. So this is huge news in the community, and everybody's all at Twitter. Now, we are a ways from being able to prescribe this medication. There are many things we need to consider before we can do this. But if we know patients who are at risk for developing type 1, we know that we can delay that onset. That's 2 years of treatment that we don't have to do. That saves hundreds of thousands of dollars. Diabetes is very expensive to treat and manage. So it saves money, it saves time, it saves heartache and headache on families. So this is a huge deal. And I expect that we're going to be seeing this come to children's probably within a year to 2 years as we work through all of the issues that are coming out with, including the fact that this is a very, very expensive medication. My understanding is the current price point is around $200,000 for a 14-day course of this medication. So it's up there with some of the most expensive chemo. Again, I put a pause here for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. And we'll have lots of time for questions here at the end. So I wanted to talk a little bit about other things that you can do to help manage diabetes. And so as you can imagine in this world of tech, there are a lot of apps that you can use to help manage your diabetes. Now, again, it does vary on what type of diabetes you have and what you are looking for in an app. So I did break these down for type 1 versus type 2. The most common ones used for type 1 is My Sugar. This is essentially a central place to document everything. So it has a dose calculator where you could calculate how much insulin is needed for your carbs and your corrections. It keeps track of your blood sugars. It can estimate your A1C based on your trends. And so everything is available at one touch of the button. Glucose Buddy is very similar, but it allows for the integration of Dexcom and integrates with Apple Health. So as the name implies, it is only compatible with Apple products. So if you are an Android user, too bad you can't use this product. And then Calorie King is a really great app for patients with type 1. It's essentially a repository of almost any food you can imagine and what the carb counts are for in those foods. So that's really handy when you're out and about and are eating at a restaurant and you want to know how many carbs are in those French fries that you really want to eat. You can just pull up this app and find out really quickly. And then for type 2, there's a couple of other ones that allow for some social media context. So Bezi, which is an online community for anybody with type 2 to get together and collaborate and commiserate about issues related to type 2 diabetes. And Fujicate, which is a grading system that can tell you that those French fries that you want to eat are really not that great for you. And perhaps you ought to choose the sweet potato fries instead of the French fries. So these are just a few of the apps that are out there. And, you know, the things that you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about apps is what am I going to use it for? Am I going to use it to track my carb counts? Am I going to use it to identify foods to eat? Am I going to even use it? I don't know about you, but when I see an app like this, I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to meditate every day using this fantastic app. Oh, yay, I did it for 2 days, and then I'm done with it. So that's really important with any app. The other important thing is this app going to be used by the parent and family or by the patient? We do deal with a lot of helicopter parents who want to micromanage their child's diabetes, which is great. And that provides a lot of burden, not only for that family and that parent, but also for that child who is then dealing with the constant give insulin, take carbs, all of that becomes really, really important over the course of time. And then it's also important to know that every one of the companies out there that does diabetes and uses diabetes tech has their own app. So even though I've just talked about 5 apps that are available that are not associated with a particular product, there's an app for your Dexcom, there's an app for your Libre, there's an app for your Tandem, there's an app for your Omnipod, there's an app for your Medtronic, there's an app for this, there's an app for that. So you could get app overload because you're using 10 different apps to measure 10 different things. My dream is that there will be one ring to rule them all and that there will be one program eventually out there that can truly manage diabetes and be one place to look for things. The last thing I wanted to just talk about is incorporating this technology into daily management. So this is really important, and some key takeaways that when you're thinking about diabetes technology is that it's really important to understand the variation between that glucometer and CGM. I know I alluded to it, but I do want to talk about that one more time. There is a difference in those numbers. And again, currently on the market, CGMs are actually a little bit more accurate than glucometers, the market glucometers. I will say that the glucometers that you use in the hospital are highly accurate, but they are still going to have a different number than that CGM. So if you're going to be using a CGM inpatient, you need to keep in mind that probably what you want to look at is the trend, not necessarily the number. And I mentioned that. So use that CGM to identify the trends. Are your patients going up? Are they going down? Are they staying steady? What is happening with your patient on the inpatient side? And how do we want to treatment? How do we want to treat that? Now, I talked a lot about closed hybrid loop and what's important about that and how that is revolutionizing the diabetes world. And with that, we are starting to have conversations about why can't we use these technologies in surgery? Why stop insulin delivery if we have a system that is monitoring the trend of blood sugar and is able to suspend if a patient is going low or deliver more insulin when going high? Why would we take that off during a procedure? So this is actually something that we are working on at Seattle Children's right now. We're developing a policy on the use of hybrid closed loops in patients and what that would look like. With the advances of biotherapy and the FDA approval of T-Shield, we're hoping that we are going to see fewer patients that are diagnosed with type 1. Since COVID, we have gotten to see a doubling of our new onsets, and that's not exciting for anybody. And so we would like to see that number go back down. And so we're hoping the T-Shield will help reduce that. And then with this great technology, it's important to recognize that even those who are poorly controlled can benefit from this technology. So a case in point, a patient with an A1C of 12, which is really high, not one that we would like to see. You get them on a tandem control IQ pump, assuming they never ever cover their carbs and they never ever bolus when their blood sugar is high. They're still going to see their A1C reduce, maybe not down to 7, but maybe down to 11 or even 10, which is an improvement in their care, and it's going to delay long-term complications of diabetes. So getting patients on this technology is super important. And then the last one that I wanted to mention that really pertains to those who are inpatient. For patients who are admitted in DKA, we have been experimenting the last year. It's not really an experiment. Many studies have been done about this. But we've been administering Lantus or long-acting insulin as soon as we possibly can. And the reason why we've been doing this is because it shows that, A, it steadies those blood sugars, and it helps get patients off of that insulin drip much faster. So that's fewer blood sugar checks that you have to do. That's fewer blood sugar checks the patient is going through, and the patient is able to resolve their DKA quicker. So that's important on a day-to-day management for diabetes. So that is the end of my presentation. I would love to entertain some questions. I have, looks like a little bit of over 10 minutes to be able to address some of those questions and comments. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
There were a lot of questions, so I wanted to make sure that you went through your content before I start sharing all of the questions that came through. Give me one second. So a lot of questions regarding CGM. The first one, when you start a patient on CGM, do you have to validate it against finger sticks blood sugars for a certain amount of time before relying on just CGM?
You do not, especially with Dexcom and Libre. It is already calibrated and ready to go. So CGMs have a warm-up period, roughly ranging from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the CGM, where it's gathering that data and getting to know. So you don't have a reading during that 2-hour period, but what it's doing is it's learning your body during that time. It's still getting a sensor reading every couple of minutes or so, and then is able to immediately provide a number once that warm-up period is done.
Great. Next question. How are the carb ratios and correction factors determined for diabetes? Is there a formula used?
Yes, there is a formula that is used, and that is something that our providers do. It is based on height and weight, and it is, I want to say, is 0.2 units per kilogram is a rough idea, and please don't quote me on that, but there is a calculation that the medical provider does in order to determine the starting point. Now, that is the starting point for your carb ratios and correction factors. Once that initial dosing has been determined, then we adjust 10% up or down based on what we see in the blood sugar data. And I'm sure you can Google and find out what that formula is. I'm sorry, I just don't know it off the top of my head.
All right. What types of CGM slash pump combinations allow for closed hybrid loop?
So I hope I answered this question. There are three on the market. So it is the Medtronic, which uses the Medtronic Guardian with the Medtronic pump. And then Tandem and Omnipod use the Dexcom for their pumps. Now, I should say that in my perfect world, we would have 6 CGMs and 6 different pumps, and you could pick and choose, but we're not there yet.
Can you tell more about smart pens and how they differ from regular insulin pens and how difficult it would be for someone to have insurance to pay for it?
So the good news is that smart pens are covered by most insurance, and if it is not covered by insurance, there is a price point of $35 for the pen. So they differ from the regular pen because of that app. Otherwise, they function as an insulin pen exactly the same. They use a cartridge as opposed to a pre-filled syringe. They do change the cartridge out on that pen, so you use the pen over and over again. But essentially as a Bluetooth sensor that connects to your phone and allows for that to be tracked. Now, one drawback to that smart pen is that it does not share outside of the user's phone. So as a school nurse, you wouldn't necessarily be able to share the in-pen data. You would share your Clarity data or your Dexcom data, so you would be able to see the trends of those blood sugars. And it's not difficult to obtain. Please have your student reach out to us, and we can certainly help get them on an in-pen.
And here's a question about Tzield, and how many years has it been studied on human trials or human trials?
My understanding is it's been studied for, I believe, the last 2 to 5 years. Again, it has been through random controlled trials and FDA clearance just in the last month or two. So we're still learning a lot about Tzield.
Okay. And a follow-up question to that, do you know what the process was to determine that it delayed type 1 diabetes by 2 years or versus 1 or 4 years?
So I know very little about it, but what I do know, I did hear a great speech on it. So what happened is there's been a study that's been going on for decades called TrialNet, where family members of people who are diagnosed with type 1. So, for example, my son has type 1. So myself, my husband, my daughter, all have been through TrialNet, where they take blood samples. And with those blood samples, they can identify the antibodies that determine your risk for type 1 diabetes. And they then look at those antibodies, and if you have 1 antibody, you're not at high risk. If you have 2 antibodies, you're at a moderate risk. And if you have 3 antibodies, you're going to get type 1 diabetes within a certain period of time. So that's the baseline data that they looked at. So then they trialed this Tzield on patients that had either 2 or 3 antibodies, and then kept taking blood samples every 6 months, and were able to then see over the course of time if they developed type 1. And so what they compared that to a control group who didn't get Tzield. So knowing that 85% of people with 2 or more antibodies were going to get type 1 at some point, they were able to compare that to the control group who were getting diabetes within, a certain period of time. And then the Tzield population was delayed an additional average of 2 years past that onset. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. Just let us know if that didn't quite answer. Okay, yes, it did. Great. Here is another question. How do you factor in active insulin shown on the pump with insulin correction carb coverage calculations?
Awesome question. So the good news is the pump does that for you. So when you put in, so say they have active insulin on board and you plug in carbs for lunch, it's going to subtract the total amount of insulin to be given automatically. So as the school nurse, all you really need to do is verify that that bolus has been given. The pump will do the rest. So you don't have to take into account the active insulin. The pump does that for you.
Great. And then what do you do when a CGM is more than 30 points different than a finger stick?
Well, it depends on where you're located. If you're in the hospital and that's more than a 12% variation, you would recheck the blood sugar on the glucometer. And depending on the CGM, you can calibrate it. But for the most, so the policy at the hospital currently says you're going to use the information off of the glucometer. What I would tell you is you should be using the CGM if you're not in the hospital for your data point, because it is more accurate. So we really try to strongly encourage families to not use a glucometer if they're on a CGM, and let the CGM be your guide. Again, if you were to take two different glucometers on the market and test the same patient with the same sample, you would get two different results. So it's relative. Your treatment decision is really based on whatever you decide is accurate. So for our treatment purposes, we say if you're on a CGM, that is what is going to be accurate, and we're going to use that for treatment decisions. Out of getting a serum sample, is the only thing that is 100% accurate for a blood sugar amount. And we're not going to get serum samples every time we want to correct carbs. So you need to choose a product and stick with it for your treatment decision. And if you're inpatient, that's going to be your Abbott glucometer. If you're outpatient, that's most likely going to be the CGM.
There's another question. Can you review what the arrow trends mean? I think there was like several slides with it.
Sure. So there are different combinations of arrow trends, and I'm actually going to pull up something really quick. Let me see if I can get it here. So there are different arrow trends, and you can see it'll either be an arrow going up, an arrow going down, an arrow going sideways. So arrow going up means blood sugar is going up. Arrow side means it's steady. Arrow down means it's dropping. Now I'm going to try and show. You can't really see on my screen here. Oh, my finger's
Yeah, I don't
blocking
think
it.
we can
But
see it all.
this
Yeah.
is my son's current glucometer, and you can see that it's 164 with an arrow trending down. So his blood sugar is actively dropping right now. Now, it's not dropping particularly fast. If it was dropping really fast, you'd see two arrows going straight down. And so with that particular number, 164 going down, I know he just ate breakfast, so I'm not concerned about it. But if it was 164 double arrow going down, I'd probably look at it again in 10 minutes and see if I needed to do something. So likewise, double arrow going up, I might need to make sure that I am telling my son to take some insulin. So those are the things that you use the arrows down. Typical number of days of hospitalization, inpatient education. So it really does depend on the presentation of the patient. If a patient is in DKA on admission, they're going to stay until their DKA resolves, and they're going to receive 1 day of diabetes education inpatient. So at this point, we've been doing outpatient education for the last 3 years. So we admit patients to our outpatient program if they're not in active DKA, but they clearly have diabetes. So that's been diagnosed usually at a PCP's office or through our ED. And if they're not in DKA, they'll come to our outpatient. So if they're admitted inpatient or if they come through our outpatient program, they're getting the same education. It is 1 day of education where they're learning essentially survival skills, the basics they need to know to be safe at home. So then they go home, and they're at home for about a week, and then they come back and get the rest of their education, which is another half day of education. That second day of education, we're covering more complex topics such as exercise and sick day management, more nuanced aspects of diabetes management, how to eat out, those kind of things, home-cooked meals. So those things come once you've had the opportunity to acclimate to that daily routine and the daily management of diabetes. Being diagnosed with diabetes is like drinking water from a fire hose. It's a lot of information you have to take in all at once, and you have to take it in because you are being told, hey, your kid has this disease now, and if you don't take care of it, they're going to die. And so that's really overwhelming, and that's kind of where you start off with when you are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And so, keep in mind, 100 years ago, before insulin came about, this was a deadly disease, and kids did not survive. You did die if you had type 1 diabetes. So we have made huge advancements in the care of these patients. And today, a child with type 1 diabetes lives a normal, healthy, happy life. And that's really amazing and really exciting. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, Joy. There were a lot of questions, and I'm going to have to save them and potentially send them off to you just so you can get some themes on potentially future training and education that's needed for our community. But thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your vacation.
thank you so much. I had a great time. Enjoy the conference,
Right.
everyone.